On a list of historically bad ideas, Japan's decision to bomb Pearl Harbor always gets an honorable mention. Given that for Japan the outcome was not exactly a positive one, it's natural to ask what its leaders hoped to achieve. So why? Why did Japan bomb Pearl Harbor? So before talking about the attack itself, it's important to look at what the Japanese government's long-term plans were for the country. Japan is not a resource-rich country, and so in order to secure long-term security in terms of things like oil and food, Japan sought to expand its borders and create what was known as the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, an empire which would see Japan as the hegemon of Asia and the Pacific. By 1939, Japan had already achieved some of its expansion and was in control of Manchuria, as well as waging war against China for more territory. With respect to further expansion, the Japanese government had two options. The first was the northern plan, favoured by the Japanese army. This argued for the invasion of the USSR via Manchuria in order to secure the land and resources of Siberia, whilst also grabbing Mongolia and much of China. The idea was that communism was the biggest threat to Japan and that the Western powers would do little to nothing in the defense of the USSR. Plan number two was the southern plan favored by the Navy. This would see Japan strike southwards and take the American and European colonies in Southeast Asia, notably Indonesia, to secure their abundant resources. This would inevitably lead to confrontation with the world's imperial powers and as such was seen as the much riskier option, but to the Navy, the US was Japan's biggest threat. So when border skirmishes broke out with the USSR, the Japanese army didn't perform all too well, and as a result, the Japanese government saw the army as incapable of fulfilling the Northern Plan, whereas the Navy was still seen as incredibly prestigious, and thus their plan won out. The decision to strike south was accelerated in 1941 when the USA placed an oil embargo against Japan, something that the Americans said would only end if Japan abandoned its war with China and its gains in Indochina. Surely Japan's southern ambitions could be fulfilled without dragging the US into war, right? Well, no. Whilst the US public was against intervention, Roosevelt made it clear that much of the region was under US protection. So why attack Pearl Harbor, especially given the size of America's Navy and its unmatched industrial base? Well, to be clear, the Japanese did not believe that they could win a long drawn-out war against the United States. And so the Japanese government decided that since war with the US was inevitable, the victory needed to be won with a single decisive strike which would cripple the US Navy. The idea was that with the US Navy crippled, it would allow time for South Asia to be conquered, and such events would then knock American confidence so badly that its people would sue for peace. Not everybody in the Japanese government thought that this was a good idea, though, and many made clear that they would lose any war, long or short, with the United States. They did it anyway, and we all know what happened. And the reasons were simple. They felt that they had to, and importantly, they thought that they'd win.